Hey guys, what is going on? Duff King 56 here, back to continue our Let's Play of Final Fantasy XIII-2, but I'm not actually continuing the Let's Play at this point. Actually, what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be embarking on a few bonus episodes while I'm at it. These will all be produced before I start back on the Let's Play story so that I can still just flesh out a little bit more recordings ahead of time so I know what I'm doing. But today, what we're actually going to be embarking on is we're going to be reading about some fragments. Now, if you do not like reading of this sort, then feel free to just click off and then join me back when I start with episode, I think, 104 or 105. Either way, come back then, because what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be going down locations here. I'm going to be talking about fragments that I've been getting, fragments that I'm going to get, and just reading off some of the complete areas and sort of talking about them as I go along here, because I've been promising that I'm going to be doing more bonus episodes like this, so that's what I'm going to start on anyway. So today, I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to be covering all of Bresha, and I'm going to be covering all of Yasha's Massif in this session, and then I'll do Erba and Sunlith, and then I'll wait until I complete. I could probably do Augusta too. I'll wait until I complete some more of these worlds so that I can just continue discussing the story from there. Because as you can see, we still have a little bit to fill out in New Bodhum 700, and that's after we actually beat the game. And then we have, obviously, we have other ones to grab, like the 4 legendaries here in Arclight Steppe, the Archild Steppe, I should say. We have a bunch of map stuff to grab in Academia 400 and 4XX. We have to do all the quiz games, which I'll be doing very, very shortly, actually, when I go in and do that. And we still have Academia 500, which is the actual continuation of the main story. So without further ado, let's actually just hop right into Bresha, a 005 here, AF, and we'll start discussing some of these fragments here. The Atlas Fragment, the best of the bestiary, and of course he bested us multiple times when we tried to close the gate. If you haven't really figured it out yet, this is going to be a little more of a casual session of recording, so take a deep breath. I'm back and I'm in the game, but I'm going to be talking just about these fragments, talking about the areas, I guess, a little bit as well. But anyways, we're going to talk about the Atlas Fragment. Atlas is a giant war machine that was excavated from the Bresha ruins. The technology appears to be of human origin rather than fal'Cie. This suggests that it is a relic from a future civilization. The machine can be operated through its crystal-controlled AI and sensory perception apparatus. Academy scientists hypothesize that the machine was built to combat large-scale fal'Cie, but stress that their research is still in the early stages. So that's something that we've seen sort of as a theme, I guess, that I would explain in Final Fantasy, at least the 13 series, is like the humans' outreach of technology ends up causing like chaos and sort of like a high amount of stress to everyone around them, including the world. I mean, Atlas wasn't just affecting the people in the Bresha ruins, I'm sure it was affecting the wildlife and such. So I guess, I mean, what they're trying to reach for is that the whole idea about technology. Again, I thought it was just kind of interesting because literally the first area that you get to when you come out of New Bodhum is Bresha ruins. So you come into this whole different environment and you just get smacked, like you really do, by this Atlas just like right in front of you, and you have to sort of try to deal with it as best as you can. It's kind of ridiculous because the guy's really powerful, and unless you actually weaken him before, you have to really wait a while before you actually have a chance to go back and fight him on your own terms without actually messing with his AI. But I guess that's a good thing. It's something that, you know, you take into account when you actually play in these areas. So that's the Atlas Fragment. The Gas Fragment, which is what we found when we did the quest. The Seath, including monsters such as the Gas, are created by fal'Cie from living humans. When people who have made l'Cie are when people have been made, really, is that even a sentence? When people who have been made l'Cie are unable to fill their focus, okay, there we go, they are transformed into Seath. Places where fal'Cie were once active and often infested with large number of wandering Seath, the fal'Cie have also been known to transform weaker humans into Seath en masse. So that's kind of sad. These unfortunate victims become soulless puppets of their fal'Cie masters, forced to fight in their defense. fal'Cie often uses power when they are under immediate threat. So we actually saw a little bit of that in Final Fantasy XIII as well, when everyone was turned into l'Cie, and then they sort of all of a sudden were unlocking these magic powers when they had to fight when we had to fight our first fal'Cie in Final Fantasy XIII. It's kind of interesting though, because these guys are sort of at whim of the fal'Cie, but from at least my understanding of what we're fighting here, we're not actually fighting a lot of fal'Cie. Was this guy a fal'Cie? I mean, this guy was a Seath, so we don't actually deal with many of the fal'Cie masters in this game because we did a lot of ordering in Final Fantasy XIII with them, and we actually killed a bunch of them in Final Fantasy XIII from my understanding as well. So it's just kind of interesting that you come up against these large Seath and they end up being these fragment bosses that you have to defeat. I mean, we defeated one in Yashas Massif 110 or Yashas Massif 10, either way. That was one of the tougher fights, so it was just kind of interesting. At least personally, I thought. Here we go, the delicate crystal. The yellow, by the way, is the category of the fragments, so something to think about too. I'm sorting this by locations. You can sort it by fragments, and it's a little bit different. Anyways, the Wisdom of the Mughals. The Time Labyrinth is a work-in-progress space that its creator couldn't be bothered to finish because of a paradox, Kupo. We can... I'm talking like Mog. We can transform it into what we should by resolving the paradox, Kupo. But the creator was lazy and irresponsible, Kupo. What? That sounds like me. No, it doesn't, Kupo. So this is, I think this was one of the fetches that we had to grab in this area. I thought it was kind of interesting that they sort of laid out the different fragments in this area, since there were 8 of them, pretty nicely. I think it flowed pretty well with the area, and you always had to come back to grab them if you possibly could. So it's kind of interesting. This one apparently was part of the Nora House Chronicles. Sarah's left on a journey too, so things are going to get busy around here. She was the only one who knew how to cook all the Nora's house's dishes. With her gone, it's just me holding down the fort. Sarah used to get good grades back in school. History was her favorite subject. She was teaching the kids the odd class here and there, but Snow and her were talking about building a proper school right here in New Bodom. When they get back, we're all going to pitch in and make it happen. So I think this is coming from the point of view of possibly... what's her name? Gosh darn it. What's the female's name that sort of keeps the whole Nora group together? It's not Godot, because that's the male's name. There's Huge, Godot, and the other male, Mackie, and then LeBro. That's her name. I think this is from the point of view of LeBro. It's just kind of interesting how you could see the far-reaching effects of Sarah leaving with Noel. This is another one of the chronicles here. The last time Sarah saw Lightning was right before she turned into Crystal. She told Lightning about her plans to marry Snow, but when Lightning refused to bless their marriage, she took off running. That's no way to say goodbye. Those two still have unfinished business. Here in New Bodom, Sarah spent a lot of time looking up at the night sky, talking to Lightning. She's never been able to let go. I think this is definitely from the point of view of LeBro, because she's the one that, when Sarah was fighting in New Bodom, Lightning's dead. Like, you have to pull yourself together and fight these monsters off. So it's kind of one of those beginning game shocks I thought were really interesting. How about the Unio Mystica here? This is another one here. Back in Bodom on Cocoon, there was this weird relic called a vestige that had been lifted off Pulse when Cocoon and Pulse were fighting. Turns out there was an old Pulse temple, and there was a fal'Cie inside that turned Sarah into a l'Cie. It seems crazy to think now that no one thought to check inside before they set it up to our hometown. When Sarah got turned into a l'Cie inside the vestige, the Cocoon fal'Cie used the incident for their own purposes. Sarah's not a l'Cie anymore, but the brand is gone, and the brand is gone from her arm. But she's still able to use magic. I wonder if the power just stayed inside her when she was cured, or is it new from somewhere else? So that's kind of interesting, because you get into this dynamic where you're talking about Sarah from the point of view of her actually being a l'Cie at one point, but now you have to look at her too from the being a servant of the goddess that is part of this game, that Lightning is also serving, the goddess Etros. So it sort of adds, like I said, another layer onto this whole story. I think it's really cool, and she's obviously the powerful mage of the two, both Noel and Sarah, so I thought that was pretty interesting. Here's the Ars Symphonica. This is another one from the Nora House Chronicles. Everyone in Nora came from Bodom originally, but there's not a soul living there anymore. When Cocoon fell and almost smashed into Pulse, the whole town was wiped out. Funny thing is, no one was in the town thanks to the purge that the Sanctum and Psycom carried out. Does this mean the purge was a good thing? Well, I wouldn't say that. Bodom used to be famous for its fireworks festival, and our cafe should be busy as anything the night of the show. I hope someday we can bring those good times back here into New Bodom. That's kind of a sad sort of story, because when you look at at least a lot of the scenes from Final Fantasy 13 of the fireworks festival, it really looked like an amazing time. And I believe that's where Snow actually proposed to Sarah when he took her on her motorbike through the whole show. And even the show itself depicted a large historical battle that happened between Titans, and it sort of formed everything that they knew today. It was like one of those stories. So I thought it was kind of interesting. I think it's kind of cool that they really do put everything into context with these fragments, because these fragments are technically like bits of time that aren't supposed to be there, which is why you're collecting them. They're all paradoxes, so it's at least from my understanding, it's really cool. I think that they still bring back 13 a lot, but a lot of it you really have to look for because this isn't really apparent in the storyline, so kind of interesting. And here's a fragment from the Gravitron Cores. The Hero's Trail. Whoa, that was one crazy dream. I didn't get that talk about gates and artifacts and stuff, but you gotta do what Big Sis tells you, right? Looks like this journey is going to take longer than I figured, but Sarah and Godot and the gang, they'll understand, right? So this is coming straight from Snow's point of view when he has to leave, and you actually find him. You don't even find him at New Bodom. You just know that he left and that Sarah's waiting for him. But you find him in the Sunless Waterscape, which I'm sure we're definitely going to get into with some of the fragments there. But I find it interesting that everyone really is forced to leave or perform some sort of action against what they naturally would have thought is going on. So everything really does contribute to the story in the end. Everything is connected. I really do like that, because you can't just track down some loose end and get lost in the story. Everything is sort of clear cut once you get into the nitty gritty and divide up the story. So that was the Gravitron Core beta, and that was all the fragments for Bresha Ruins 005 AF. So we're going to move on to Bresha Ruins 100 AF now. We're going to talk about the Caliph fragment. We might as well start right out with that. This is from the Best of the Bestiary category. So we were talking about another fragment boss here. The Caliph Striker is a bioweapon that was deployed by the elite PSICOM forces of the defunct Sanctum government of Cocoon. It was believed that these weapons were all lost in the catastrophe, but at least one apparently fell into the void beyond. The Caliph was reborn with new, more deadly powers. Its wings can warp time and carve scars on the surface of dimensional space. Wherever the Caliph alights, it leads space-time mangled and wrecked. Fortunately, the damage has been so far restricted to the Bresha Ruins, and Cocoon itself appears to be safe. We should be thankful for all the small mercies. And I remember this fight very well. I mean, it was only probably 3 or 4 weeks ago where I actually ended up in the fight with Caliph, and the description of it's actually pretty scary if you think about it. I mean, you end up fighting a literal paradox distorting demon-ish type bird, and you end up having to... It gives you a pretty good fight, and its physical attacks are very strong from what I remember. So I don't know, I just thought it was an interesting fight, and it's pretty sweet how you can go back here and learn a little bit more about the bosses. I mean, the fact that it came straight from PSICOM really gives it some context into why you should be afraid of it, because they made some pretty crazy shit, I remember, in Final Fantasy 13. So it lends itself really well to some of the boss designs in this game. You get to see a lot of their technology and things like that. Oopsies, excuse me. So let's go on to the elemental rings here, which I really did enjoy doing. Although the rings were kind of fetchy in their own nature, I still find it a lot of fun, and I think it lent itself to some pretty good stories here. Bresha Ruins monster mop-up, so I guess that's what you end up have to do. At least that's the category. Anyways, look, I'm going to spell it out for you, nice and clear. The Bresha Ruins are suffering from a serious monster problem. There's a big reward for anyone who can shut down the infestation once and for all, but in the meantime, the government's handing out bounties for single monsters. We've got no choice if we want to keep Cocoon safe for humans. The government has assigned us, agents, the task of handing out the bounty to registered mercs. We used to demand the head of every monster as evidence, but some heads are pretty hard to collect, from bombs, say. So now, it's all automated and recording direct to the kill count. Today's kill count, 13 monsters confirmed dead, 6 monsters injured, none seriously. Very interesting. And if you remember, those quests weren't that terrible. They weren't exactly all monster killing quests. There was one where you had to tame the guy in the left-hand picture there, and there was a lot of fetchy quests, but there was also a fair share of, I mean, you had to kill the Caliph boss, and there were some distortions that you had to do. So I think it added a lot of diversity to this area, especially since it's a late game area. That's one thing you want to worry, is that once you get to these late game areas, they're not really going to offer much to the story. But I think it painted Bresha in a very interesting light, very different from Bresha 05. I mean, this is technically Bresha 100, I believe, so it's really interesting to see how, you know, 95 years later after you take down Atlas, how everything's sort of overgrown and wild, and it changed from a snow to like a grassy grassland area. So we're gonna move on to the Rhodium Ring here. Let's see, the mercs around here love their gold. Yes, they do, and silver and gems and whatever else they can turn into cash. Back in the old days, we used debit cards. Almost no one carried hard currency. But when the Paradox screwed up the entire system and no one could prove how much they owned, well, that was a nail in the coffin for virtual money. We'd always had a black market currency under the authorities' radar. You know how people don't like paying taxes. Anyway, it was simple enough to switch to that, and now even government uses it. So metals are king again, and everyone loves their gold, which is why these rings are so important. So as you can see, the kill count went up by 1, and the kill count also went up by 1. Seriously, being injured. So it's really interesting. Talk about how the government even uses the black market and how everyone is monetarily driven, which lends itself really well because you want these mercs down here to fight these monsters that are really dangerous in the Bresha ruins, so that they not only do they cash in, but you're also ridding of an area pest, and that is pretty gosh darn important if you're talking about pest control for one, but also if you're talking about just crowd control for, you don't want these monsters spilling over into other environments where there might be actual people living. So just really interesting stuff. I think it really set the scene very nicely here. But anyways, we'll move on to the Palladium Ring here. Monsters are too hot to handle today. Lots of casualties. Score 1 for the monster army, I guess. We're going to get more hunters on the job, and we're going to be in a world of trouble. What's that? Why don't we leave the monsters alone, you say? Nah, wouldn't work. The government tried abandoning these ruins once years ago. Oh man, that was a disaster, let me tell you. The monsters kept coming and coming. They poured out of the ruins, out of the hanging edge, and started appearing in our cities. If we'd let things go, Cocoon would have turned into one giant monster nest. So we introduced a bounty system and started to drive them back bit by bit. So as you can see, they still only killed 3 monsters, but 20 hunters were injured and 6 being seriously injured. So very, very scary stuff. And the story keeps building on itself. I like how, although you did different things to get these fragments, the story keeps building and building and adding to itself. I think it's pretty cool. I think it's a really nice effect. And like I said, it only just strengthens the late game areas. But anyways, let's move on to the Osmium Ring. Probably a very dense ring, as I continue to harp on. Monster extermination operations in the Bresha Ruin have been assigned to mercs by government agents. The Academy has adopted a total hands-off policy. I guess that this is all government is good for now. We sit around and hire other people to do the dirty work for us. The Academy scientists are sucking up all the resources for that big project of theirs, and the government gets the crumbs, excuse me. Still, if the Gate research is completed and the monster infestation problem isn't solved, the Academy will find it harder to steal our funding. So a lot of confirmed dead monsters, but also a lot of hunters being injured as well in these processes. But this is where you ended up talking about in the story whether or not you want to blow the ruins apart, and I think that's what they were referring to when they were talking about the scientists' big project. But you end up figuring out that if you blew the ruins apart, that you basically destroy everything. That'd be terrible, but we're going to move on to the Adamantite Ring. We're going to talk about that. We got some interesting news to report. It was about a mystery device that was unearthed on Bresha ruins in 5AF after the fall. I'm talking about the control device for Atlas. Turns out the technology in this thing is a lot more advanced than the giant itself. We could actually build Atlas today with our current know-how. The problem is the engineers haven't been able to figure out how the device works, and we'd have no way to control the giant. The controller appears to read human thoughts and transform them into physical action by some kind of telepathy. No one knows who built it or how. It's like an object from another world, a real paradox, so an actual real paradox. And the monster confirmed dead count even higher now, but also even more hunters are being injured, which is probably why the fact that Noel and Sarah appeared when they did in this area was probably really good news for the commander. And you ended up having to fight Caliph probably because their forces were thinned out so much by the other monsters. So it's just really interesting, and you're going to see this control device probably pop up in Bresha 300 as well, because it was so important to killing Atlas. And like I said, there's so much they didn't know about it at the time, and that they were learning about it as the more and more they studied it. And I think it serves a lot of parallels to the Oracle Drive, which is something straight from Etro, which is what you'll use to see the future. how little Hope knew about it when they were in the Yashas Massif in the earlier times. The more and more they were learning about it, and the more the picture became a lot more clear, the more they studied it, and with the presence of Sarah and Noel getting some of the fragments. So that was it for Bresha Ruins 100. Now we're going to move on to the Bresha Ruins 300. There's only 4 fragments here, so a little bit less, but I mean, 18 fragments in just 3 areas is still a fair amount for this game. So move on to Bresha 300 here. We'll start with the Iridium, with the rings again, because once again with the elements, it's probably pretty important. And we're still even talking about the monster mop-up. The more and more we were in here, the more and more we were still killing everything and trying to fetch from the scientists and find out a lot more about their plans. The government sent me one of the branch offices, so I have no idea what happened in the ruins, which means no report today. Although I could tell you about my trip, I guess. I went to the old commercial city of Palladium, and I couldn't believe how many people are still living there. I guess it's not surprising. The city was barely touched in the catastrophe, and the provisional government was located there for a while. The residents have even kept the old name. I guess they like it. So you start to see people trying to get back to where they were before in Final Fantasy XIII, and I think it's really interesting that they talk about Palladium, because the only reason I believe you were there in Final Fantasy XIII to not only, I think you encountered a Fal'Cie that you didn't kill, but it served as a travel hub, but I think Hope also found his dad there. I think that's where Hope's dad was living, and you ended up having to fight your way out of it as well, but it was definitely a turning point in the story for Hope and for the party of 6. So I think it sort of adds that they're going back, like I said, to these old areas and stuff like that. I don't know if I went out of order, so I'm going to go back to the control device password too. I was thinking about the order that I actually grabbed these secrets. This is from a different category though, so this is talking about item info. This is one of the passwords needed to access the Atlas control device in 100 AF Bresha, which was locked by some unknown person, which is the scientist that kept sort of biting at us because we were trying to get through. The encryption technology appears to use the paradox to enhance lockdown security. Virtual space exists inside the control device. Enclosed within is a temporal rift. To get the password, the puzzles on the rift have to be solved. So, very interesting. Once again, we're talking about that whole idea how these temporal rifts are surrounding the important items of the game and the important items, especially the one that controls Atlas, and the fact that it actually sprung us, I believe, to fight. I think it was the only way that we could fight. I'm trying to think, what was it? It had connotations with the other password that we got, but I think the temporal rifts allowed us to I think it actually allowed us to finish off everything in the other Bresha, and then we could fight Caliph, if I'm not mistaken. So it was really important that we did that, but it's just also interesting how science is still shrouded in a lot of the different what you have to collect in different time periods, how they're affected by what you're doing. Anyways, we'll continue on. We got the Platinum Ring here. We're almost done with the Bresha, so good news and bad news. But we had our first fatalities today. They were fools who ignored orders, but still, you don't like to see it when it happens on your watch. We'll raise a toast to them tonight. It's getting hard to keep up with the kill count. The mercs are expanding the area of operations throughout the ruins. The improvements in the AMP tech are amazing, but we're still trying to figure out how to deploy the weapons effectively in the field. Lots of confusion, lots of mistakes, which means more work for me. I believe we're talking about this is from the commander's point of view, I believe, the one that we talked to right out of the gate of Bresha 300, or 100, excuse me. Here, 200s are actually ended up dead, which kind of sucks, and 3500s are seriously injured, so you could see that their technology, once again, is sort of muddling issues that they're trying to fix in what they're doing with the area, because once technology gets involved, like I said, they weren't quite prepared for how to use it effectively. Lots of confusion because they're not used to using technology, and lots of mistakes, and it didn't actually end very well for them, considering 2 of them were killed. But anyways, let's talk about the Mithril Ring here. There doesn't seem to be any rhyme or reason of that kind, or to the kind of monsters that come out of the paradox. We get wild beasts, ancient pulse weapons, everything. Every military security bots, even military security bots attacking civilians. I wish I knew how to get up there into Cocoon. A lot of stuff that comes out, well, we have no idea what era it comes from. We get advanced bioweapons from the future, extinct monsters, creatures from what must be some other dimension. according to Eggheads, it's the gate that does it, pulling in beasts from all over the timeline. So no one's killed this time around, which I guess isn't too bad for them. But you're talking about here the variety of monsters that are getting pulled in from the other time periods. I think it's kind of interesting because we saw it a little bit, at least, with the Flan in the Sunless Waterscape being tied to the dragon that we had to kill in the Arcalt Steppe. And it was really cool to see that a paradox can bring even more paradoxes into paradox-ridden worlds. Maybe that's just my personal feelings, but I think it's pretty interesting. I definitely have to say. And like I said, it all really serves to strengthen the story, which is pretty gosh darn cool. But that's it for Bresha Ruins. I'll catch you guys next time we start talking about the Ashes. We'll see plenty of fragments to talk about. This has been XIII-2. I'll see you guys later. Peace out. Bye.